Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Okay, AlexMercedCoder.dev. And today what I want to do is do another to-do list. So in the previous video I did like right before this, we built this to-do list here. Okay, and let me just open that up real quick so you can see it. Open with live server. Okay, so we built this to-do list over here if I can get it over there. There we go. Okay, nothing super fancy, you know, I can add a to-do and remove a to-do, and it persists. So if I added like 3 of these and then I refresh the page, using local storage, we're able to save the list of to-dos between. But here's the thing. A to-do list, I think, is generally like my favorite project when it comes to learning, because essentially when you build a to-do list, you're building all the functionality that pretty much any app has, which is add a thing, remove a thing. If you want to get advanced, you can add the ability to edit things. But I mean, essentially, when you think of any app, any like web application you use, like whether it's like a note app where you add notes, delete notes, edit notes, they're all essentially what you call CRUD: create, read, update, delete. You create things, you can see the things, you can read them, you can update the things, and you can delete the things. Okay, so essentially, if you can make a to-do list, you just replace the to-dos with something else, and then you have every other kind of app. So I could just say, hey, you know, you're just adding like entries on a bill or a budget or something like that. So I always say, like, whenever you're learning like a new framework, a new language, the first thing you should do is build a to-do list. Okay, whether it's, you know, a visual to-do list like I have here, or whether it's like a command line to-do list, like because a lot of other languages, you know, you may not be able to do as visual stuff as easily. Um, you know, something along those lines. And then first you create like a simple to-do list like I created here. But the thing is that if you want to start getting better, what you do is you start making more and more complicated versions. So in this video, what I want to do is we're going to take this whole to-do list thing. We're going to do it again. So I'm going to start from scratch, but we're going to add an extra thing where one, to-dos are going to actually have descriptions. So instead of just being like a one phrase thing, they'll have like a title and a description. So that way, you know, we can add notes to those to-dos. And then 2, we're going to add the ability to have like categories of to-dos so that we can group your to-dos by category. Okay. Levels of complication that I'm not going to get into here are things like editing, like how would I edit a to-do, an existing to-do, or how would I move one to-do from another category. Those are challenges that I recommend if you follow this tutorial, go back and see if you can figure out how to add that functionality. But essentially, that's how you learn. Like build the same app, but every time you build the app with just maybe a little bit more of a feature set. Okay? So people say like, well, I've built a to-do list. Like, you know, how many times you... The great thing about building a to-do list, especially if you do it in different languages, is that you're not relearning how to build the app. Okay? You can just then focus on learning the syntax of the framework or the language or the library that you're trying to learn, because the idea, like the structure of the application is kind of already in mind, like how the app is going to work is kind of already there. You're just now implementing either additional features or learning how to do it in a different environment. Okay. The problem is if you try to build a whole fresh app with a fresh original idea, then the thing is that the challenges of coming up with the thought process and the logic for the new app muddies the waters of you learning the syntax of the language or framework. So that's why I'm a high encourager of just literally building to-do lists over and over and over again in as many languages, frameworks, and libraries as you can. Okay, because it's, you know, a perfect representation of just like a pure app. Okay, so now that we kind of talked about where we're going and why we're doing this, let's just start the setup. So this time, instead of doing everything in one file, since things are going to get a little bit more complicated, I'm going to use multiple files. Okay, so to make setting up all these files a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this to-do2 folder in VS Code. So let me just actually go open folder. And I'm going to open up the folder in VS Code, to-do2. So that way I have a nice blank workspace. Okay, I always like having a nice blank workspace when I work on something. Okay, and then I'm going to open up the terminal, and I'm going to use the terminal to make the files. It's just a lot faster to do this, like touch index.html, styles.css, app.js. Okay, so I'm just going to touch my files. My files are there. Okay, and now main thing is to go get the boilerplate for my index.html. So there it is. Let's connect my JavaScript file. So I create a script tag. I'm going to use emit. So there I choose the source. And then again, since they're in the same folder, I can just do app.js. Okay, now what if I wanted to organize my code? Like sometimes people will organize their code because they may have multiple JS files. So they may do something like this, where instead they'll have like a JS folder and a CSS folder. Well, not there. A CSS folder. And then instead they would put the app.js in the JS folder. They might put the styles.css in the CSS folder. How would that look like? So instead of me typing in app.js, because it's no longer in the same folder, so that's not going to work for me. So what I have to do now is I have to put in the relative file path. So it would be like // which represents starting from the current folder, which is the to-do2 folder. I'm going to go down into the JavaScript folder, and in there's a file called app.js. So you see, like, you have to tell it where to look for the file. Okay, it's not going to know to look in a folder above you or below you, you know. So one dot always just means like the folder that you're in. Two dots means like up a folder. So this would mean like go up a folder, then go down into JS. But I'm starting from the folder that the index.html is in. Because again, it's relative to the file where I'm referring to it. So in this case, this is the index.html file. So relative to the index.html file, I'm just going to go down into the JavaScript folder, and then there's the app.js file. Okay? Then I'm going to add the defer keyword. Okay, and the defer keyword, again, it's just going to make sure that the code doesn't run until the DOM loads. Okay, and then we connect our CSS file. So I'll use a link tag. So link CSS. And since I moved that into a folder, it's going to be the same story here. ./CSS/styles.css. Because again, the file name's got to match. Okay, because the idea is the computer's not smart. The computer's stupid. It only does what you tell it to do. So if you tell it to open up a file, it's going to be very literate about what you told it to do. It's going to look for the file with the exact name you told it in the location you relatively referred to. So if I just pass the file name, it's going to assume that it's in the same folder. Otherwise, I have to tell it what folder it's in. So here I'm saying, hey, you have to go down to the CSS folder, and in there you'll find, and the dot helps it know that it's starting from the current folder. So from the current folder, go down to the CSS folder, and then there you'll find the styles.css. Okay, so file paths, and I'm pretty sure I probably have another video on file paths. Okay, cool. So that should connect. So let's open up my index.html, open with live server. Okay, good. Now what we want to do is check that it's all connected. So I'm going to open up DevTools. And I'm going to head over to the Sources tab. And then there I see the CSS folder. And inside of it, the styles.css. Here I see the JavaScript folder, and I see the app.js. So all my files are connected. So I'm all set and ready to go. Okay, cool. So actually, even before I start writing anything in the body of the HTML, I'm actually going to start with the JavaScript. Because now there's going to be a lot more things I need to kind of keep track of. I'm not just keeping track of like to-dos, but I'm also keeping track of categories. Okay, and categories of to-dos. So generally, once you start having like more and more data that you have to track that controls like what your app looks like, you might want to group them together. Okay, it's also going to make it easier to save into local storage later, because then I can just save all the data as one big object. So generally what we refer to as the data that kind of controls like how your app is working and what's going on in the app is referred to as your state. So it's like in the same way that like I have a state. So how I feel will determine how I behave. Okay, if I'm happy, my state is happy, I'm going to behave in a different way than if my state is sad. So same thing here, your state are like different variables. So like your to-do list will look different if your array of to-dos has different information in it. So these are the pieces of data that are going to reflect your app's behavior. That's the way you want to think of state. It's just these are variables that generally exist the whole time that your app is running, and when they change, your app, like what you see visually on the screen, is going to change. Like if I get rid of a to-do, how many to-dos I see on the screen is going to change. If I add a to-do, how many to-dos are going to change. So we're going to just create an object called state. Okay, and if you later on like learn things like React or Vue, you see that this whole idea of state becomes really, really important. So it's really good to just kind of get used to it now. So the best way to do this is just create an empty object that's state, and then we'll add things as we go. A couple things we want to add out of the box. I'm not sure if we'll need anything else. But two things we want to add right out of the box is one, the to-dos, which we'll just start off as an empty array for now. Okay. What we'll do is we'll start off with an example to-do. Well, we'll come back to that. And then categories. Okay, which is also going to be an array. Okay, so I have these two properties in my state. To-dos, which is going to be my array of to-dos, and then I'm going to have the array of categories because every to-do belongs to a category. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just generally put in like some initial data in there. So I'm going to put like an initial category, which is called general. And then I'm also going to want to-dos. I'm going to want to-dos to, what am I thinking of? I want to put like an initial to-do. But to-dos are more complicated. They can't just be information. I want there to be a title, some text like description of the to-do, and I'd like to know which category the to-do is in. So in that case, to group those three things together, each to-do really should be an object, not just a single string. So in that case, we'll create an example to-do, okay? And I'll just kind of space this out so just organize it better. And again, each to-do should have a title, which we'll just say first to-do. We'll call it example. And then should have a description, and which we'll just put like example description. And it should have a category, which will be general, because we know general exists. Cool. Very, very nice. Okay. Nice. So that's going to be sort of our initial state. So basically, that's going to be like the start of our to-do list. We know we have one to-do and we have one category. Okay. Now the next step is, okay, the problem is like, well, let's just kind of set up some initial steps here. We're going to want our title. So in H1, that's not going to change ever. So like, category based to-do list. And we're going to want a section to do our like form so we can add stuff. Okay. Although there's two things you can add. You can add a category and you can add a to-do. So in that case, maybe I should do two forms. So let's try that out. So we'll have this one, we'll call this, we'll give it an ID. ID equals add category. Okay. And then we're going to have another div for the actual add to-do form. Okay, and then we're going to actually have a section for like, and I'll use a main tag. A main tag is just a div, like main, header, footer, aside. I think there's like one more. They're all just glorified divs that are semantic. They're referred to as the semantic tags, and they do give information to like search engines. So like search engines will read that this is a main tag and think, oh, this is the main content of the website. Okay, but again, you could also just get by with just using divs for pretty much everything. Okay, so I got three blocks here. I have a div, these two divs, and this main tag. Okay, and this main I'm going to keep empty because since we have a dynamic number of categories and to-dos, it'd probably be better if I dynamically generate that in my JavaScript because I just really don't know what I'm starting with. And again, I'm going to want that to load with your existing state when you refresh the page. So it's got to be a dynamic process. Okay. Now, what we're going to do, okay, so first what we want to do is populate to-dos, okay? So we want to just like populate the state we already, this initial example state, and get that on the screen. Okay, so right now, again, I see this, and actually, what I should do is add some headings here. So we'll do like an H3, add a category, and then here add an H3, add a to-do. So that way those sections are a little bit more visible. Okay, nice. And then here the main will take care of that in a second. So so we're going to create a function. Let's go again populate to-dos const. We'll call it we'll use function keyword. Function populate to-dos. Okay. And what it should do is we're going to get that main tag. So const main equals document.query selector. main. So I'm going to grab that main element because that's where we're going to populate all our to-dos. Okay. Okay, and then we want to make sure that we populate, like group them in by category. Okay, so this is going to get interesting. Okay, because again, I'm just making this up on the fly. So like, I could probably, if I spent some more time thinking about this earlier, I could have probably thought, even more efficient ways to do some of these things. But now I run into this situation where I don't have the to-dos grouped together by category. I have like an array of to-dos and I have an array of categories. And I want to make sure that like each category, each to-do shows up under the thing for its category. So in that case, what we have to do, one way we can do this is like this, now that I think about it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to loop over each category. But first, actually, what we want to do is empty out the main tag, because we want to clear out the main tag, because we have to assume that every time I run this function, there might already be stuff there. Like I'm going to run this multiple times, and I want to make sure I rebuild it, so I always make sure I have the right information on the screen. So clear out the main tag. So main.inner HTML equals nothing. So that'll empty it out so that we rebuild. And then what I'm going to want to do, okay, is set up all the categories. Okay, so we're going to basically create, and we'll create an aside. Well, an aside, I guess, is just another glorified div. Create an aside. I could have easily just used a div. Create an aside for each category, with the category as an ID. Okay, because that's going to help me later when I populate the to-dos. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is say for let cat of, or actually let category of categories, and it's actually not categories, it's a state.categories, because again, the categories is actually a property of the state object, so I got to refer to it that way. So state.categories. So don't forget, if you do this whole state approach and kind of bundle all your state in here, you want to make sure that you refer to the object. Okay, so let category of state.categories. So for each category, what I want to do is I want to create an aside. So const aside equals document.create element. I'm going to create an aside. And then I want to change that aside's ID. Aside.set attribute, and I want to set the ID to whatever the category is. Because again, the category is just a string. Like this is just an array of strings. So we'd set that one category to general. Okay, so now that thing has a category of general. Okay. And then I'm going to set the inner text aside dot inner HTML. I mean, I could just make the h1 and append it and all that stuff, but to make my life a little bit easier, since I know it's blank anyways, I'm just going to use this way to change the HTML. I can just set the inner HTML and just replace the entire HTML inside the aside tag and just say, hey, h1, I'm going to use backticks. So I'm going to say h1, and then actually not an h1, we'll make it an h4. And then in here we'll put the category. So that way the category name shows up there. Cool. And I am going to set a class just so that way I can style each. So side.classlist.add. I'm going to add a class of categories so that way I can style all the categories the same later. Okay. And okay, so now my side is all built, and then it's just a matter of attaching it to that main. So main.append equals, or main.append the aside. Okay, so that'll create an aside for each category, which is what I want. So let me take a look at the, well, technically this function hasn't been called yet. So here we'll just do the initial population when the page loads. Okay. And we'll just say populate to-dos. Okay. And that'll kind of kickstart the app. And there we see the general category right there. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've populated the categories, and then we'll figure out how to populate the to-dos in a moment. Okay. Now, I'm trying to think whether I should move this into a separate function. Like, is there any reason I would want to keep this code here? Just because this populate to-dos function is going to get really big if I just put all the code in here. So I'm going to say, hey, you know, this, I'll make like each step its own function. So that was just going to be easy to think through what happens in the function. So what I'm going to do is I'll maybe move this. I'll move all of this into another function called, you know, generate categories. Okay. So that'll do that. And that's still going to do what it's supposed to do. And then it will just kind of call it here, generate categories. So that way, again, my populate to-dos, as I figure out different steps of things I need to do, I can just plop them as functions. And it becomes a little bit easier to understand what this function is doing. So it's generating the categories first. And I'll have a separate function for the next step, and so forth. Okay, again, trying to use functions as like these little pieces that you can then use as building blocks. Makes life a lot easier. Okay, so now if I look at that, that still gives me the right end result. Okay, but it's just, again, you know, I'm not going to have one big giant function, but just a lot of little functions that I'm composing together. Okay, so that's all fine and good. Okay, let's style this a little bit so it looks a little bit more appetizing. So let's see here. Let's just start off with like the H1. Okay, so let me head over to styles.css. There generally should only be one H1 per page. You can change the size and whatnot of any other like H, but the H1 is what like search engines are going to kind of treat as like your title. So if they see like many H1s, it can sometimes hurt your search engine stuff, your SEO. So let's see here, the H1. Okay, I want to say font size, extra large, why not? Color, I'm going to leave the background white, so something that should show up nice against the white. Just use some of these like pre-populated colors. Oh, this is fine, saddle brown. Okay, and then text decoration. Let's give it an underline. And let's give it like a purple underline. Okay, and let's see how it's all looking. Okay, yep, there it is. I mean, that's ugly, but, you know, whatever. Let's make that even bigger. Let's make it like 3 EMs. Let's center that, text align center. Okay, and let's give it a better font family. Make it impact, that's always a good title. And let's see how that's looking. Okay, yeah, that's looking like a title. Okay, again, this is not a styling lesson. Okay, and then let's style those sections of like add category. So add category, add to do, and those are both IDs. So let's see here. So add category, the ID, and add to-dos. Did I do to-dos or to-do? Add to-do. Okay. Styles. So basically what I'm doing here is that every time you have a comma, you can actually like style multiple selectors with the same rule. So I'm just saying, hey, whenever something has this ID or has this ID, this is the style that I want to apply to it. Because they probably should look the same. Okay, so what I'm going to want to do here is I want to make the width of these boxes about 60% of the screen, which means I'm going to want to center that box. So margin auto to center the box. I am going to want some like top and down margin, so we'll give it like 10 pixels of cushion top and below, because again the first number is top and below, the second number is left and right. Margin, let's put some padding in there so it doesn't get claustrophobic, so let's put like 8 pixels of padding. let's put a border so that way you can kind of see it. So let's just say like 3 pixels, a solid line, and the color we'll say is like, we'll keep it brown since we used kind of brown earlier. Let's see how that's looking. Okay, so you can see like these are becoming like a thing. And let's just text align, let's like text align center, so that way like the form and that text, since they're all inline elements, will be centered, center. Okay, and then that's looking good. Okay, so we can see like those sections are being pinned. And do I want to keep the same thing there for? Yeah, I probably also want to do that with the main. Actually, no, I'll just kind of slightly different. No, let's actually just keep it the same for the main. Let's see how that looks. Main. Yep, there we go. That's fine. And again, just kind of having that little like gap here, that little space here, just kind of can be like a little bit aesthetic. Cool. Let me just think about that. Okay. Yeah, that's good enough for now. Let's actually style each individual category, because again, each category has a ID as a class of category. So class category. And then each category will be 90% of its width. So width 90%, so it'll be like 90% of the 60%. Again, we want to center that as well. Auto. We'll make it like 5 pix auto. So that way they're not like grinding up against each other. Padding, put like 5 pixels. We'll put another border inside. So we'll just make that like a 2 pixel dotted green line. So you can see, so you see like each category is going to have its own box in there. Okay. And that's good for me. Okay. Cool. So now that we've added the categories and we've provided some basic styling, the next step would be to add the to-dos. Okay, so let's create a function that generates the to-dos. Okay, so we'll just do another function and then we'll make that like the next step. So function generate to-dos. Okay, let me just like label each of these. Like this will create function to generate categories on the DOM. This will be the function generate to-dos on the DOM. This is going to be the main function that resets the app. Function that sets and resets the app as information changes. Okay. So now what's going to happen is that we're going to want to loop through the to-dos. So it'd be like for let to-do of state.todos. And here's going to be the logic. Again, when we generate the categories, we gave each category an ID that matches its category. So we can take advantage of that and say, hey, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab that particular side for that category. So const cat equals document dot query selector. And we're going to look for the thing that has the ID. And I'm going to use backtick. So I'm looking for the thing that has the ID, so hash. Okay, and then I'm going to use interpolation to say, okay, I want the thing with the ID that matches the to-dos category. Okay, because again, each to-do has a category. So I'm looking for the one that has an ID that matches that category. So basically what I'm doing is I'm interpolating the category into the string so that I'm dynamically generating the category ID that I want to grab. Okay, so now I have the category in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create our div. So const, actually just use a p tag, const p equals p equals document dot create element p, and then in that p tag, so I'm going to say p.inner HTML. So we're going to just write out the HTML explicitly. I'll use backticks because again, backticks I can use interpolation, which makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to just say, hey, for in each p tag, what I want is I want an h4. We'll just do another an h5, I guess. An h5 that's going to have the to-do.title, because again, we know that every to-do has a title, description, and category, because that's the way we designed our app. So again, you have to kind of think through like the shape of your data ahead of time. And then below that h5 will be a will just be the text. So we'll just say right here, then we'll inject the description, which would be to-do.description. Okay. And then we will append that p tag. Okay. And actually, I should probably add a class to it. So we'll say p.classList dot add is going to equal to do. So we're going to add the to do class there. So we can style all the to dos individually as a group with that class. Then we will append to the category dot append p. Because again, what's going to happen is that we're selecting that category based on its ID. And again, we'll just kind of see it like, see, now we see, well, I have to add this function. To do is never reassigned. Fine. I don't really care about that warning. And then again, we want to generate the to-dos after we generate the categories. So I'll add that right after generate categories runs, we'll run generate to-dos. And see, now we see the first to-do there inside the general category. There's our example to-do. So we know that this is working. This logic is working in displaying the data that it needs to display based on whatever's in that state object. So now going forward, we just have to figure out like how do we update that state object and then run this whole populate to-dos function again to update it. Okay, so cool. Add a to-do, add a category. We'll get to those next. But just to kind of show you how that all worked, body, main. So you see each category got an ID that matched its category. So what we did is when we use document that query selected to target the aside that has the same category as the to-do, and then we add an h4 and a p tag in there. Okay, or I mean the p tag in there for each to-do. Okay, and you see that p is an individual to-do. Okay, so that's kind of how that is working. Okay, now let's just style that to-do real quick so it's easier to tell to differentiate the individual to-dos. So once again, I'm just going to pretty much copy this. It's going to be pretty much the same idea. The only difference is that instead of green, we'll say here, was it like dashed, and then we'll make this red. Okay. And you see like there's the category, the green box, and inside of it are to-dos, the red box. Okay. Again, not super pretty, not meant to be. This is just can illustrate some logic on how you build this thing. But the idea is you're saying like I'm just taking each step that I want to make, breaking it down to a function. I'm not thinking how to do the whole thing right now. Like I haven't figured out how to build the whole app yet. I'm just thinking, okay, what is the thing I need to do? And then making a function that does just that. And then as I do each step, I'm just going to add it to my populate to-dos function. So literally just like making a function out of each step. Okay, although there's going to be one more step we'll add to this a little bit later on. Okay, so now the next issue I have is going to be setting up the form. Okay, so let's go to index.html. Let's set up the first form, adding a category, which should be easy enough because it's literally just going to be one. So we create like a form in here, and there really just needs to be one input of type equals text. Okay, and we're going to give it a name because we need because we're gonna have other text inputs, so I need a way to target this. So I'm just gonna give it a name property, which is a thing that inputs can have. You could just make up your own properties anyways, but we'll give it a name of new category. And we'll put some placeholder text. We'll just say, name of category. And then we're going to add a input, type submit. And say name. Actually, we don't need any of that. That's fine. And then we're just going to do a value to change the text on the button. So submit or new create category. And that should be good. That form is complete. Okay. So let's just take a look. And we see the form right there. We'll style the forms later. Okay. Now we just need to make that form actually do a thing, which is going to be pretty straightforward. All it needs to do is push whatever we typed in there into this box. Okay. But we're also going to fix another issue we're at it, because if we take a look at my old to-do list, there's a little bit of a problem here. If I type in cheese and then create to-do, you see this still says cheese. Don't you expect that the form will clear itself out for you? We're going to talk about how you would do that while we go through this. Okay. So let's head over to index.h, the JavaScript file again. Okay. I want to keep that populate to-dos. Generally, if I have a function that runs when the thing goes up, I just kind of want that at the bottom. It just makes the most sense to me that all the other code gets kind of read into it before that thing kind of kickstarts everything. So here we're going to create the, adding a category when you submit the category form. That's what's happening here. Okay, and so essentially we need to get the form. Okay, so I'm going to just choose like const cat form equals document.query selector. Now as my selector, I'm going to take a look here and I'm going to say, okay, how can I target that form? Because there's going to be two forms, so I can't just say form. What I can do though is I can say, hey, I'm looking for a form that is a child of the add category ID, because that's going to be unique. So let's just use that. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to have the add category ID, and as a child of that, there's a form, and I would like to grab that form. Okay, so again, this means a form that is a child of an add category ID, which is what this is the case. This form is the child of this div that has the add category ID. So that should successfully select that. Okay, so that should have that now. We can always just double check console.log cat form. Always especially check when you're starting to use more complicated selectors. So open up the console and yeah, that worked. See, there it goes. I got the form. Good. So I can get rid of that console log. That did the job. Cool. So next step is I want to add an event to it. So I'm going to say cat form dot add event listener. And when the form is submitted, so on the submit event, I'm going to need the event object, so we will grab that. Okay, so there's a function. And of course, I'm going to want to do a prevent default to prevent the refresh of the page. Okay, so it's going to prevent the refresh of the page every time we submit. Then I'm going to want to grab the value of that form, so const form, or we're going to say input equals document.query selector, and then I'm going to grab that input. But I want to grab not just any input, I want to grab the input of the text type. So input square type equals text. Okay, so that should grab the right element. Okay, so add category input type equals text. And then again, I want to grab the value of that. So I'm doing it all in one line. I could have just, grabbed the input first and then grab the value, but I'm just going to do it all in one slot. So I'm going to say input, we'll call this variable input value. Okay, so you see what I'm doing is I'm selecting the element and then immediately chaining off of it because I'm not going to need it again. Once I get the value, I'm good. Okay, so I'm chaining off of it and getting the value. Okay. You know what? I'm going to change that just to make it more clear what I'm doing. So we'll say const value. And then what I'm going to do here is cut this out. So here I'm saving the actual input element. And then I'm going to grab the input.value instead of just doing it all in one line, just to make it read a little bit more clear for all you watching the video. So again, I'm grabbing the input box, the thing you typed in, and then grabbing the value of that input box. And then I'm going to take the state, because again, state we have the categories array, which I can then push into the value. Okay, and then we're going to take that input.value and clear it out, so make it empty string, so that way it empties out the form. And then we should run populate to-dos again, because now that the categories have changed, we should update what's on the screen. Okay, and that should work. Okay, so let's try that out. So again, I'll type in like, work. And see now there's two categories. Cheese, the cheese category. So see now I have different categories for my to-dos. Okay, and I can keep adding categories. And not so bad. Okay, nice. Okay, now to do the add a to-do form. Now where we're going to get into a wrinkle with the add to-do form is trying to like specify like, we could just create an input box where the user inputs which category they're adding the to-do in, but what's going to happen is people are going to mistype a category, so they're going to end up adding a to-do to a category that doesn't exist, and it's going to cause issues. So we want to make sure they can only choose the categories that have been created. Okay, so what that's going to mean is that we're going to have to generate the form dynamically. Not all of it, but yeah, we probably should. Okay, so that means we're going to want to create a function for that. Why? Because the form is going to change. As the categories change, the form changes. Okay, so we're going to need to set that all up dynamically. So I'm going to create a function to generate that form. So function generate add to do form generates the add to do form. And again, that add to do form is going to be generated inside of this over here. Let me think about this. You know what? I will at least put the form tag here. Okay, and then we'll populate what's inside the form tag dynamically. That's what we will do. I can probably make it a little bit easier. Just thinking about it. We'll populate everything. So here's what I'll do. I'll have the, because essentially the way it's going to work is that we should have an input. That's not going to change ever, so we can probably pre-populate that. Okay, we'll just call this new to do. Okay. And this will be the, placeholder title of to do. Actually, this should be like the to do title, because I forgot there's going to be a description too. To do title of to do. Okay. Then we're going to have the to do description. Okay, this will be the description of to do. And then we're going to have was it select? Yeah, select element. And this is what creates like the drop down so you can choose which category. But we don't know how many categories exist, right? Because we can add categories. So I have to generate, this is what I need to generate. Okay. So really that's the only thing I really need to edit. So I can even add the submit button. So here we go, create category. Just copy that submit button and just say create to do. Okay, so really at the end of the day, like generating the categories is really just me adding a bunch of option tags right there. Okay, so that's actually not going to be as bad as I thought. Okay, sometimes it's good to just build out the things and you'll start seeing what you need to do. Okay, so a select tag is going to create like a drop-down menu. So if I take a look over here, so you can see here like this is a drop-down menu, but there's no options yet. So that's what we're going to have to generate dynamically. We need to generate basically each tag would look like this. It's called an option tag. So it would be like option, and and then it would say like the category there. So general, and you can see like now there's general as an option. So I need to generate a bunch of these, one for each category. Okay, so let's start with that. Styles, app.js, generate add to do form. So it's really going to be just generate category options. So let's call it that, generate category options. And basically what we need to do is we need to like const, we need to grab that select element. So there's only one. So honestly, I could just do document.query selector select. There is no other select elements, so I can just grab that. And then we'll add each category. So I'm going to say for, category of state.categories. So I'm going to loop over all the categories again. And then for each category, we're going to create an option tag. So const option equals document.create element, an option tag. And then each option tag, the text of it, so option.inner text, is going to equal the category, because the category is just a string. How do I know that? Because I can take a look at the array and see that everything in the array is just a string. Okay, option.inner text, and then we append that, we take the select, and we're going to append the option. Okay, and honestly, we should probably clear out the select on each round because again, this will be updated multiple times. So select.inner HTML equals nothing. So that way on each time it does this, it's going to, and then we can add that to here, generate category options. Okay. So you see like first it's generating the categories and it's generating to-dos, then it's going to update that form every time it does this. So now, if I create another category, or see here, if I create like cheese as a category, see now general and cheese, because what you don't see is that this is being updated every time that populate to-dos function is being run. Every time we run populate to-dos, which we do at the end of adding a category, it's going to go through this whole process again of generating the categories, generating the to-dos, generating the categories options, which sounds like a lot of work. I was like, hey, you're pretty much rebuilding the whole website every time something changes. Yeah, that's generally how a lot of this sometimes works. This is where like libraries like React, Vue, Svelte, and Angular become really useful because they have a lot of extra stuff going on under the hood to limit the amount of updating that needs to go on. So that way, like, hey, if we can get away with only updating like a less, we'll just update less. So that way you end up having less expensive updates. But if you're just doing it with plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you kind of have to think through all that logic, and trying to create like a more efficient update flow can be sometimes, that's where you start getting into like much more complex functions because you're checking, okay, hey, what has changed, what hasn't changed. So that way you can kind of determine what are the only DOM updates you really need to make. At this stage, in these beginner days, the easiest thing is just to rebuild the thing. Anytime the data changes, just rebuild the thing. And that's what we're doing here. Every time the data changes, we run populate to-dos, and it just rebuilds the categories, rebuilds the to-dos, rebuilds the select options based on the updated state. Okay, so that's good. So we can add categories now. Yay. Okay, next I guess would be adding to-dos, because now I can actually select which category the to-do belongs to. Okay, so let's do that. So basically it's going to be very similar to this. So adding, because it's just basically one big event. So this is going to be to-do form. Adding a to-do when you submit the to-do. And instead we're going to add like add to-do, I think it is. Add to-do, good. Okay, so we're going to grab the add to-do form. And then we're going to add an event listener to the to-do form. So that way when you submit on the to-do form, it's going to prevent default again. We're going to grab, but we're not going to call this input anymore because we have multiple inputs we need to grab. So we're going to grab title. And instead of saying input type equals text, we're going to use name. Name equals, and let me see, what name did we give it? The name is to-do title. So we're going to grab it based on the name property. So we're going to say, hey, give me the input that has a name of to-do title. Okay. Then we'll do the same thing for description. To-do description. And then we need to grab the value const category equals document dot query selector. Then we're going to grab the select option. I don't even need it. There's only one, so I can just grab it. Okay, cool. So now I have all three of those form inputs inside variables. Okay, and again, I couldn't use the select variable that I created earlier because the select variable I created earlier is inside this function, so it only exists in that function. So I had to go grab it again. Okay, cool. So I have that, and now I want to create the new to-do. So const new to-do equals an object with a title, and the title is going to equal the value of the title input. We're going to have a description, which is going to equal the value of the description form input. And then we're going to have a category, which is going to equal the category node value property. Okay, so that's going to create an object that matches the shape, right? So like if we take a look at our array of to-dos, see each to-do should be an object with a title, description, category. That is the data model. That is like the shape of the data. Okay, and we got to stick to that pattern because that's what we committed to. That's what our other code expects. It expects an object with those properties. So we have to write code that generates an object with those properties. Okay, so I generate this new to-do, and then we're going to push that into state.todos. Okay, state.todos, push, and we're going to push the new to-do into it. Then we're going to blank out the form. So we're going to pick each of these inputs. So that would be title dot value, and then I got to do the same thing for the other two. And this will be description, description dot value, and then this will be select dot value. So that way they all get blanked out. The form gets blanked out again, and then we repopulate the to-dos. Okay, so that should do it. So now I should be able to add to-dos. Okay, so let's try this out. I'll add a category. We'll say work. Okay, adding the category worked. Now let's add a to-do. Stuff, do work stuff. And I want to add it to the work category. Oh, looks like we got cannot read properties of null, reading value, line 78. So let's head over to line 78. Title.value. Why does it not find title.value? And see, this is why it's always good to check your variables. So that means that's telling me, oh, that's because I can change these to to-do. Okay, you might have seen me, you might have caught that already, but I'm selecting the wrong element. Okay, so now let's try that again. So I add work category there, and then I do work, do work stuff. And then I'm going to say, hey, do it in the work category, and I hit create to do. Oh, looks like there's another problem. Select is not defined. So I read the error, it says it's on line 86. So I head over to line 86. Let's see what the problem is. It says select not. Oh, we called it category. Yeah, category. Okay, that's what we called the variable here. So that's what I got to use. Okay, so let's try that again. Add the work. And it's probably thinking, it's like, why does it disappear every time? Because right now I haven't built the saving and loading functionality. So every time the code gets updated, live server is refreshing it and it's starting from scratch. So we added the category, work, do work stuff, work, and that worked. See, like it added to do to the right category. And if I add another category, cheese, I can then see cheese as an option to add a category to. Okay. Very good. Cool. Yeah. Now the next thing to do is that we do want to make it where you can remove a to-do, so we should probably do that next, and then we'll do the save load. Okay, so we're getting there. Okay, this is gonna be a longer video because it's a more complicated to-do. So let's think about where I want to do that. So generally, when we generate the to-dos, we just probably want to put a click event to remove the to-do. Okay. Okay, so I don't want to have to write that all in here. So probably the smart thing to do would be to write a function called remove to do. Function remove to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass the to do into that function. So this function will receive an argument. Okay. Function to remove to dos. And you know what? We are going to add it above because I'm going to end up referring to it in here. So I'm going to want to define it before I refer to it. I just like having that consistency, even though you don't have to when you're using the function keyword because it'll get hoisted. So let's see here. What do I want to do? So the idea is we're going to get this to do. I need to first identify what the index is of the to do. Okay. So for this purposes, I am going to have to use a callback function because I didn't pre-plan to do this in an easier way. So I just have to do it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const index equals state dot to dos dot find index. What this do is going to return the index of something that matches my search function. So I actually have to give this thing a function that receives like a to do. Okay, so what I want is saying, given t, that's going to be the to do in the array, I want to look for a to do where t dot title equals to do dot title and t dot category equals to do dot category. So it's going to look for a category with a matching title and category, and then return the index of that to do. That way, if you have two to dos with the same title but in different categories, it should still work. The only problem is what if you have two to dos with the same title in the same category, or yeah, that would probably be the only situation you have. So then you run into a little bit of an issue. That's as good as it's going to get for now. But this should, again, work as long as you're not creating like two to-dos with the exact same title in the same exact category. So there, that is a limitation. Again, I could also check for description if I really want to be like extra specific. So that way all three things have to be the same before this, and there's a problem. Which again, it wouldn't be that hard. I would just do and t.description equals to-do.description. So I was looking for the one that where everything is the same. Okay, so if all of that is the same, then that will get back to this, because again, this is an arrow function, so this really means like given each to-do in the array, and then this, I'm returning this Boolean expression, so it's going to return true or false. And it's going to find the to-do that returns true and give me the index of that to-do. Okay? You know, using something like index of would be easier, but I can't use index of with an array of objects because objects are always not equal to each other. So it doesn't matter. It just won't work. Or would it in this situation? I'm passing the object by reference, so it might work. Thinking about it. It might work. Let's try it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this line to see, you know, if I do this, if I try to do this the easier way, because I'm passing into to do. So since I am passing into to do, it should be the same exact object under the hood because it's all done by reference. So this might work. So let's see here, const index equals state dot to-dos dot index of, and then we pass in the to-do. Okay. And let's console.log index. Let's just see if this works. Okay. And then we're going to add this as a click event on the to-do. So every time that new p tag gets added, p dot add event listener. Anytime you click on that, what's going to happen is that you click on it, it's going to run a function, and literally all this function is going to do is run, what's the name of the function? Remove to do. Remove to do on that, based on that to do. Because again, we have the to do defined from over here, so I can use that right there. Cool. So let's try that out. So right now it shouldn't like absolutely work. It should just give me the index. So when I click on this block, it should give me a 0 and console log it if this works. And that works. So let's see what happens if I add another to do. So now it should console log 1 if this works. Yes. Okay, good. We have referential equality. Okay, so we can do this the easy way. Nice. Okay, because they are technically the same object, they're the same reference. There's a little bit of nuance to that. I'm not going to get into. Look up my video value versus reference, where I get really knee deep into that topic. But yes, okay, so good. So with that, then we can just do this. State.todos.splice. We remove that one item. Okay, which is the item at the index, and we remove one item. And then we do populate to-dos. Okay, and that should do it. Okay, so I should be able to remove to-dos now. So let's see here. Haha, works. Okay, cool. But now again, still, if I refresh, it's going to do that. So what I want to do is make sure that one, that every time this thing loads up, every time I update it, it's going to save the state in local storage, and then load it when the thing loads up. So what I need to do is every time we do generate to-dos and we do all this, the last thing that it should do is save the state in local storage. Just, you know, save an updated version of the state. Okay, so in this case, we'll say local storage dot set item. We want to set state, and the value of the state is going to be the JSON string. So JSON dot stringify, and we're just going to stringify the state object. Okay, so basically that will do that. Okay. And then we're going to want something that kind of loads the state. So we're going to create another function to load the state when the app first opens up. So function to load state, function load state. And basically what's going to happen is that whenever this function runs, what it should do is go check the state to see const, load, like basically the result of loading the data. Load should be local storage dot get item state, because that's what we called it. Okay, and then we should just do if load is like undefined because there was nothing there, then we don't want to do anything. Just let it go. But if load is true, which means it has a value, then what we want to do is basically convert that string back into an object. So we'll just say const, loaded state equals json.parse, and we pass in load. And then what we want to do is say state.categories equals loaded state.categories, and then state.todos equals loaded state.todos. So we're going to take that data we just loaded and then update the state for the app. So that way it reflects. And then we're going to call this, but instead of adding this to populate to-dos, because populate to-dos is going to run anytime we change things. I don't want to keep loading the state. I only want to load the state once when the app first opens up. So instead of that, I'm going to put load state here. So instead of nesting it inside of populate to-dos, I'm going to call it before that initial call to populate to-do, so that way it only happens the first time the app initially loads up. So now when I run this, it should save. So let's see here, let's add like a work, family category. Okay, now when I refresh, those categories should still be there. And that works. So that means the same thing with to-dos, like work, do stuff. I should be able to add to a category here, create to-do, and then there it is. And like let's say I've finished doing stuff, I click that off. So we have a fully functioning to-do list with categories here. Okay, and you can see like the code like makes sense. Like see, I go all the way to the bottom here, the initial function calls that kick everything off. First thing that happens, it loads the state from local storage, and then populates the initial population to-dos. Okay, and if I take a look at what happens when we populate to-dos, generates the categories, generates the to-dos, generates the category options, and then updates the saving of the state. Okay, so every time we populate to-dos, we're updating what's saved in local storage. Okay, and then again, that populate to-dos will get called again anytime we add a category, and anytime we add a to-do, and anytime we remove a to-do. So basically anything that updates a state is going to kick off that populate to-dos function. Okay, and that's generally the function of how this is all set up. And yeah, once again, and yeah, I actually ended up doing this in less. Well, let's see here. We have that much. How much HTML we have? 36. So not that much more lines than the previous to-do list. The previous one was 122 lines. This is like 150, maybe 160 lines of code if we count the CSS. So not that much more code, but you have a lot more functionality. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Again, you can find this code if you look for this this folder. It's going to be in the repository that's in the video description for this video. You'll see like there's a big repository with a bunch of code. So you just look up the folders like JS, and then it has like this month's date, which is actually you can see what the folder is right here. So when you look at that repo, there'll be a folder called JS2210, and in there's a folder called to-do2 with the code for this exercise. So otherwise, that's it. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMerced.dev. If you've enjoyed this, please hit subscribe, please hit like, and I'll talk to you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.